Hey, welcome to The Feast Life, where we empower you, the modern homeschool mom, to create a life and homeschool you love. I'm Julie Ross, the creator of the award-winning curriculum A Gentle Feast, a homeschool veteran of over 20 years, and a certified Christian life coach. Charlotte Mason said, life should be all living, not a mere tedious passing of time. So on this show, we seek to savor the feast of life. So go get your favorite beverage and pull up a chair. You're welcome at this table. Hello, this is Julie. Today's episode of The Feast Life is a mature topic. So I just wanted to let you all know that in case you are literally listening to this in the car with little ones around. You may want to save this episode for later. You might want to put in your earbuds. Today, I'm going to be talking with Kristen Miele of Sex Ed Reclaimed. So this may not be an episode you want your children listening to. So when it comes to sex education, silence isn't golden. In fact, it's dangerous. We're going to be talking about how parents can confidently tackle one of the most challenging topics in parenting. Kristen has educated youth on this topic for the last 15 years. She's taught in hundreds of diverse settings, include 2 different countries, and she has experience teaching ages 3 through adulthood. She has a bachelor's and master's of science and community health from the University of Illinois. She has also been a certified health education specialist since 2016. Her curriculum, Sex Ed Reclaimed, is selling in all 50 states and 13 countries. She's been married to her husband, Anthony, since 2016, and they live in Ohio with her 2 daughters and cats. Take a deep breath. Let's learn how to ditch the shame, equip our kids with truth, and reclaim God's beautiful design for sex and relationships. This is the conversation you didn't know you needed, but you don't want to miss. Let's dive in.
Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Feast Life. I'm your host, Julie Ross, and I'm here today with Kristen Miele of Sex Ed Reclaimed. So, like I said in the intro, if you have little ones, you might want headphones or listen to this episode when they're not sitting around listening. But Kristen, thank you so much for coming on it. This is such an important topic. And when I found your resources, I was like, oh, because it really brought in so much of what I was looking for and have not found. So, one of the things that was really important to me was to find something from a Christian perspective. I have 2 adult children now and I have 3 teenagers. So, yes. And when my older daughters were younger and I was trying to find resources, there wasn't a lot, and the things that were available, I felt did girls a disservice and were actually more harmful than helpful. And so finding your resources, I was like, oh, this exists. And so I'm so excited to share it with my audience because this is such an important topic. And so thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate that. And I completely agree. I think these resources aren't available. That's big part of why I made it. And also, mad props to you. 5 kids, 3 teenagers right now. That's a lot. I have 2. So I can't really imagine, but I assume it's very challenging and very rewarding.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, for sure. And it's so nice when they're get to be adults and you're like, oh, I really like you. The teenagers, there's some times where definitely it can be rough. I tell moms all the time, like 14 and 15 girls, but then they just become nice again around 16. I was like, oh, okay. I do like you after all.
Hormones are hard. They're really
Oh,
hard for all of
especially
us.
when you have a whole
Well,
bunch in the house, they're all having the hormones all at one time. So
yeah.
the last time that what you mentioned, this is you felt like there was a gap, and that's why you did create this. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you got started with all of this. And you're like, yes, I should make a curriculum about sex. That's like a big thing to chew off for sure.
Yeah, it is big. And I think it's one of those things where if I had fully known, I wouldn't have done it.
I feel that, yes.
Like it's a good thing you get one step at a time, one bite at a time, because as much as we wish and hope and want and pray to know the full story in the future, it's like totally a God good thing that we
Absolutely.
don't.
Yep.
So this for me was very one step at a time. I grew up in a wonderful family. I have great parents and great siblings as well. And we never talked about this topic. And I didn't understand anything really about my body, nor sex, or really even healthy dating, actually.
Hmm.
That wasn't something I think my parents felt they needed to talk about. And I'm sure that they hoped the church was doing their job and my public school education was
Right.
doing enough too. And I did go to a great school and I went to an incredible church, but again, just wasn't sufficient, which is pretty much par for the course. That's
Yeah.
very typical, even for your students, who, whatever your listener
Yeah.
has going on. This is very typical that they just don't have a robust and healthy and helpful sex ed, especially one that's biblically based or very straightforward and
Mm.
helpful. And so I went to college and studied public health, and I ended up doing my graduate degree in public health as well. And when I did that, I was assigned to teach human sexuality. And I was terrified because I didn't like public speaking, which is hilarious now
Oh,
that I think
wow.
about that, because that's most of what I do. And I really
Yeah.
enjoy it. It gives me so much joy now. I just needed to find the right topic. And two, like I said, my family did not discuss this. So when I was offered the job to teach human sexuality at my secular university,
Oh,
I
wow.
was like, oh, this is from Satan. This is like a temptation,
Mm.
obviously, because sex ed is bad and sex is a bad thing. But I had no choice really. It was going to pay for my grad school, and I had been
Mm.
praying. So part of me did trust that maybe this was from God. I just really suspected otherwise, and was mainly doing it because it was going to provide for grad school. And as I began, I noticed that my students, so they reviewed us, and the reviews were pretty mediocre.
Like the
And I knew as a
undergraduate
Christian,
students? Okay.
yes. No, they're undergrad. So I'm a
Yeah.
grad student. So
Yeah.
I'm just a year older than them, and they're
Yeah,
undergrads.
right.
And their reviews were very average and of me. And so I felt that compelling of, hey, I'm supposed to do this with excellence. God calls me to do
Mm.
all things with excellence. I think he may have given me this job, just maybe the wrong topic. He gave me the wrong
Yeah.
topic. He's not God of all things or anything. And I am not doing well at my job. I need to do better. And I started praying about that, thinking about that, considering it. And I had this total 180 God moment where he was like, why are you so afraid of this topic? This is mine. I created it. It's not
Mm.
from the devil. I gave you sex. It's my good gift. Glorify me. And it was
Yeah.
just like, oh, yeah. I think I knew that somewhere in the recesses of my mind, but that was not forefront. My initial knee-jerk reaction to that job position was that it was honestly evil and a temptation
Mm.
for something bad.
Yeah.
And it was like this totally calm, peaceful voice of, hey, chill out. This is mine. You need to do it well. And my reviews the second semester I taught were way different. They were just like, she's confident. She knows what she's talking
Hmm.
about. She's teaching really healthy perspectives. Like it was just so much better. And I went into the world thinking that was that, but I kept being drawn back into the world of sexual health. And even on the mission field, I was a missionary, overseas missionary for years.
Oh,
And even
wow.
in
Okay.
that, I was doing sexual health. And I never planned to do that. It was
Mm.
just that God kept drawing me back. And I think it's exactly because of what we mentioned earlier. There's a gap in this part of the world. There's a
Hmm.
gap in sexual health education for kids from a Christian perspective that's done really well and really fully, especially from somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Right.
And so God has drawn me into it again and again because of that, is my assumption and my guess and my leaning as I've been doing this for now 15 years. I never planned on it, but He has just again and again been pulling me back in. And it has been actually the thing that gives me the most joy when it initially gave me the most trepidation
Mm.
and embarrassment.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a beautiful story of just God's faithfulness, right, and kindness. And where were you a missionary at?
We were missionaries in Honduras for three
Okay,
years.
okay. And you were teaching some of these classes there as well?
I wasn't planning on it as usual, but I was planning on working at their local health department and
Mm.
potentially the school and the children's home. And I did end up doing all three of those things, but sexual health played a part in each of them. And I was the main health teacher for grades K through 8, which is what we
Wow.
had at the time at our school, and taught within this topic as well.
Do you feel like they approach this topic differently than the United States, or it's the same?
I would say it felt like they were teaching like we did in the early 2000s. It felt like a lot
Okay.
of
Yeah.
legalism
Hmm.
and purity culture, like maybe
Yeah.
they were 20 years behind us in that. And they're primarily a Catholic nation, but they're not known for necessarily all having individual relationships with Jesus
Yeah.
that impact things like their sex life.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the older parents I taught had, even like women's groups, had no clue about their own bodies, even though they'd had multiple kids,
Mm.
weren't having like sexually fulfilling relationships either within their marriages. And then there was also rampant, like there is here, there was rampant adultery in the, yeah, in affairs. And kids, I would say, like one of the things that levels the playing field a ton, no matter what country you're growing up in, is pornography. And
Yeah.
I could tell that not only most American kids have seen porn, but also a lot of Honduran kids had already seen it. And so just from their questions and what things I could tell that they'd seen. They were asking me things about that. So it did feel similar, even though the culture was still set in the more legalistic tendencies, whereas I feel like our culture is moving more towards conversation.
Yes, which is a great thing. Like I said, like when I first started with my girls, that was all that was available. And I was just like, want them to have a good relationship with their own bodies and themselves, but there's just so much shame. Do you find that a lot of like the parents that are using your program either come from that background or they have their own kind of like sexual trauma triggers that makes it hard for them to even start these conversations with their kids without feeling all the emotions and all the things?
That's a really great question. To the latter part of your question, have no idea how many of them have experienced trauma or abuse. I
Yeah.
do get questions like that from parents, and that even I mentioned adultery, even betrayal can make parents
Oh, yeah.
feel inadequate. Secret porn addictions or
Mhm.
confessed porn addictions can make them feel inadequate to actually teach their own children about
Yes.
sex. That's actually not the truth. That is very much a lie that you can't teach your kids because you have your own story of sexual
Mm-hmm.
brokenness. Because in reality, all of us are sexually broken. We all
Yeah.
have something that has not worked. That isn't how God wants it to be. And whether it's just that we've been exposed to things or things have happened to us or we've made decisions or there's a lack of fulfillment in our own marriage or whatever it is, there's something that's not right. And so we all have that that in
Yeah.
common, but that doesn't mean that we're invalid disciplers of our own children, right?
Mm.
Even though we're sinful beings, including in the world of sexual health. And so I do have a lot of parents who grew up in the movement of purity culture and in families like mine that were wonderful, but didn't ever talk
Yeah.
about the topic. And so, because of that, they feel very ill equipped to talk to their own kids now. And again,
Hmm.
that's part of why I think God put this on my heart to create was to provide for those parents who are ready and willing to talk about this and want
Hmm.
to, but they're just not exactly sure what language is appropriate or what they need to discuss with them or exactly how to. And I've been doing that for quite a while. And so
Yeah.
being able to provide that digitally to them in a digital curriculum is like a simple way in many concepts to give that idea to them and that language to them is just to say, hey, here's videos of me doing this. It's for
Yeah.
kids, but you can learn from it too, and you can watch it too, and we can reverse that cycle of silence that we maybe grew up with.
Yeah. And why is that important? Like, why? Let's start there. Like, why can't we just keep doing what our parents did and just close our eyes and pretend like everything will work out?
I know ignorance is bliss. We can't do that because it doesn't actually work. It's not what most armors our kids for the fight ahead of them. It's not what prepares them for the world. It's not what prepares them for future pregnancies, childbirth, dating, marriage, a healthy sex life. It sounds bizarre to say, but I have two daughters. I do want them to have healthy sex lives
Yeah.
and healthy, if they get married, healthy marriages
Yeah.
where their sex life is intimate and beautiful. And if I don't ever talk to them and then they get married, and even if they're virgins, they've never been
Yeah.
exposed to porn, which would be an absolute miracle at that point, they still are going in ill prepared because I've never had
Exactly.
conversations with them. And in reality, I do think, and I'm sure most of your listeners would agree, that we are called to disciple our kids. And
Right.
discipleship, as I briefly mentioned, doesn't just mean that you share about the Bible with them. It means that you model a good marriage and that you show healthy
Hmm.
relationships and that you show discipline to your children and that you learn, like you help them learn and educate them, right? And so that also means educating them and talking to them about this topic
Yeah.
too. If we don't talk to them, that teaches them and put our heads in the sand. That teaches them that this is a topic that is actually bad, which is why
Yes.
I got that graduate position and immediately felt shame, embarrassment, and like it
Hmm.
was a temptation from the devil when I look back and I actually think it was a gift from the Lord. And that is the
Hmm.
complete opposite, right? So how did I get that way when I grew up in
Yeah.
the church? And
Yeah.
it's because nobody really ever talked to me
Yeah.
consistently about this topic at all, or even much at all in the first place. And so I internalized that it must have been bad then, and that everything to do with sex was bad
Hmm.
unless you were married. And that doesn't set you up for a healthy sex life or a healthy view of God's gift of sex and
Right.
sexuality.
Yeah. And I think as homeschool parents, we're like I'm preparing my child for life, right? I'm teaching them geography and algebra and all these other things, but this is so key to like their mental, emotional, spiritual health, the kind of parents they're going to be, the kind of happiness they're going to have. It's not something we could just cross our fingers and hope for the best and that they'll figure this out somewhere else. Because oftentimes, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've observed, your child's not going to escape this. And they're going to hear it from other people. And do you want it to be from other people or do you want it to be from you?
Exactly. And the thing is, like you said, your child will. It is not if my child sees porn or if they hear
Yep.
something about sex, they will be exposed to porn. I have heard statistics that about 95%
Wow.
of children see porn by the time they're 14. There's a
Yeah.
lot of kids, and even if you are glass half full person, you're like, I hear that there's a 5%. That's great. I love that you're that type of person. But even me, I'm a sex educator. I'm a believer. I'm a good mom, I think. And yet I'm aware
Hmm.
heartbreakingly that my daughters will likely see something. The difference between my daughters and maybe the average kid is that my daughters know that the second they see something disrespectful, there's a
Hmm.
naked person, they need to come and tell me. And it's not because they're in trouble, but it's because we need to
Yeah.
talk about it and we need to talk about what happened and why that's not okay to see and why that's not respectful and loving. And my girls are little, so they have a very immature and childlike view of this, but they still know that naked pictures are not respectful of people.
Hmm.
And I talk about that with them because it's very possible that they could see something. And I'd rather it come from me, like you said,
Yes.
than come from the world, or for them to go into that ill prepared and it be a traumatic memory that impacts the
Yes.
rest of their life.
100%. Yeah, for sure. And I think that is a terrifying statistic, but I think I'm not surprised by it. And I think it's something we need to honestly look at because I think a lot of parents think my kids don't go to public school, so they're going to be okay. They're not going to hear about this. They're not going to see this. And I can 100% tell you that is not true because my kids have all been homeschooled and it's homeschool boys at the homeschool co-op asking for pictures from the other homeschool girls. Like it's not, you're not going to be able to escape it. Sadly, kids in church doing the same behaviors in youth group. It's not, and you have an opportunity and I believe a biblical calling to equip your children to be able to handle these things well. As I love that you call it reclaimed. And I think that ties into what we're talking about here. Can you give a little like why reclaimed? What does that mean? What are we reclaiming?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I love that word too. So I had like a vision for sex ed reclaimed. It actually wasn't my idea. So when I came back from the mission field, I was actually pretty heartbroken about it because we came back
Mhm.
unexpectedly and we never even went back to get our things.
Oh, wow.
And so because I was working three different jobs there, I was now at a loss for what I was supposed to be doing with my life. Again, thinking sexual health was in the rearview mirror. And my husband went to a missions conference. I had no interest in that at that time. I was like done.
Mm,
And so I went to a local hotel. Our daughters were being watched, and we just had one at the time. But anyway, I went to a local hotel and was praying and was grieving the loss of the
mm,
mission field, or so I felt. And it was like a very clear, hey, now you are meant to take your lessons that you know how to teach, film them, and put them online so parents can see. And I was like, well, seriously, it was like that. I was like, what?
wow.
What? No, you film your lessons. And I initially thought I was going to film my three most popular lessons and tape them and just put them online. And as I talked to a local friend who's a videographer and he got another friend who's an editor, we realized it's now about 100 lessons for kids ages
Wow.
3 to 18. So it's way bigger than I thought. But as I had that original vision from the Lord in prayer time, Sex Ed Reclaimed was right with it. So I really don't even feel that I named it. I feel that God did, but
Yeah.
reclaimed. I love that because I'm actually really passionate about the idea of sex ed, but it seems that sex ed has become very almost demonized, and some of that
Mm,
is earned, but I think the original sex educator was the Lord because he created it.
hmm.
And he includes that throughout the Bible.
Hmm.
Stories of the whole biblical story really is one of marriage and it is of the bride, right? The bride and
Yeah.
groom, the church and Christ. It starts as a marriage, it ends as a marriage in Genesis and Revelation. And I do think there's a lot to say about reclamation of that story and reclamation of the educational experience. And I'm sure your listeners would definitely agree with that
Yeah.
in a biblical way.
Yeah. So how do you bring in your faith and a biblical worldview into the stuff that you're teaching in the programs? Or is it just
very
everywhere?
naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say very naturally.
Which is
A
the best
part of me
way.
was tempted, a part of me was tempted after prayer to make it a very fact-based scientific sex ed
Mm-hmm.
program. And I've come across even in Instagram and social media influencers who tell me they're Christian on the side, but don't necessarily ever talk about that in their social media
Mm-hmm.
or in their businesses. And I respect that and appreciate that. And I almost did that myself, but I actually really can't talk about sex without talking about God. Like, how do you talk about something when you can't talk about the creator of it? It's so life-giving and it's so beautiful when you get to know the whole story. And so it's very natural for me to talk about it. I have samples on my website if people are curious how it actually is fleshed out, but not ready to get a whole curriculum yet. But I do think it's fairly easy for me to talk about sex and talk about God because He is the creator of it and He did design our bodies and He is good and He is trustworthy. And so His characteristics come into play a lot when I'm talking about these topics. And the impact of sin comes in too.
100%, absolutely, which is key to bring up. And, but in a way, I feel like just from the things I've seen from you on social media, in a way that's not shaming, which I think a lot of us experienced of this is bad. And if you do this, you're wrong. And I remember when I was in college, and I was a very new Christian at the time. And in our Christian fellowship group, we had these older women come and talk to the girls when some guys were talking to the boys. But the lady said, this girl, she goes, boys continually imagine you naked. And it's your job in the way that you dress and the way that you handle yourself to keep them from thinking that. And I like freaked. I wore sweatpants for like a whole year because I was like, what? So I feel like you approach it in a way that's very not like shame producing because we don't want to do that as well to realize because we want to keep the doors open of and you can come talk to me about these things.
Hmm.
So how do
Yeah.
you help parents keep that trust factor to keep the relationship piece to talk about these things in a way where their children do feel comfortable coming and talking to them?
So how do I make it comfortable?
Or how do you
Or
help parents approach it in a way that they can allow those kind of conversations, allow their children to
mm,
express curiosity and questions and not completely freak
yes.
out? You had something the other
Yes,
day about like
absolutely.
your body language or your facial expressions or something that made me laugh.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry that those women, I'm sure they were
Oh,
very
now
well
I laugh about
intentioned.
it, but yes.
Yeah, it is not your job. What would have been, even in that situation, I can't help but reflect on your experience. What would have been that so much more helpful in that situation is them actually talking about the idea of lust, like
Mm,
both to the boys and to the girls. Like, why do we
absolutely.
lust? And why
Yeah.
do we treat people as if almost they're an object for our consumption? And why
100%.
do we visualize people naked? What are hormones? What does that mean that we're
Mm,
doing that? And why are we doing that? And what does that say about us? And what does that say about our creator? Like, that would have been
hmm.
a more holistic, fruitful, helpful, good framework
Yeah,
as you went
absolutely.
into the future and into future marriages. But all you got was basically don't dress slutty, frankly.
Right.
And the boys got something different because they're different.
Yeah, right.
So yes, to your question, one of the ways that I encourage that is by having little conversations over the course of a lifetime. So there have been many generations in the here and now previously as well who thought that we were supposed to have a talk or do like a birds and the bees style thing or
Right.
a weekend away.
Oh,
And
yes.
not to weekend
The
away is
talk. Yeah.
fine, but it actually is really about a conversation over the course of your child's lifetime, so much so that you can even still talk about it when they're adults and it's not uncomfortable. And this takes down some of the, or takes away some of the discomfort, fear, and sense of feeling overwhelmed because now you don't have to have this big grand talk as you
Oh,
sit on the
yes.
couch and awkwardly look at each other. You can actually just have little conversations over the course of time. And the way I encourage that safe space and that comfortable atmosphere is potentially using car trips, like car rides, even just to and from places, to and from your co-op, as a place to talk because you don't have to make eye contact, especially if you have like boys.
Voice.
And
Yep, 100%.
yeah, I also encourage taking kind of baby steps if you haven't had many conversations yet. So saying things like, "Hey, honey, we haven't really talked about puberty at all and like the changes that your body's going to go through. And I know that might make you uncomfortable while I say that, but I do want to talk about with that talk about that with you because I had so many, right? Putting in your own story of this is what happened to me, or this is how confused I was, or this is my experience of having no one to talk to, and I want differently for you.
Hmm.
And so, really recognizing the elephant in the room if you haven't had conversations and saying, but I want to do better, basically. I want to do
Yeah.
differently for your good, for your safety, for your health. Even questions like, hey, honey, I've you've had sleepovers, like you've had many sleepovers. And I'm honestly wondering if you've ever seen anything at one of these sleepovers that made you uncomfortable or nervous or even really curious. I want you to know that you can tell me and that I'm not going to be mad. But I've listened to a podcast recently, right? I've heard that sometimes kids are exposed to things at sleepovers that they really shouldn't be. And I want to be a place that you can come to and talk to about that. And again, that might be in the car, right? After you
Yeah.
pick them up or something. But recognizing that, okay, porn exposure, abuse, those things happen at sleepovers. I'm going to ask them straight up if they've seen anything. And even if they lie to you or they don't tell you anything, that shows them that you're willing to talk and that you're starting to
Mm,
open that up so that they can. And this is a good thing. You want that kind of relationship with your kids, especially as it comes to such sensitive and hard topics. But even we've just had an election a few months ago. We have a new president. Like, even using the news to talk about
mm,
these big
hmm.
hot button issues is fine. It's a way to share your world, maybe why you feel the way that you do, or you as a couple, you as their
Hmm.
parents feel the way that you do. Ask them what they think, what their friends are thinking, what people in the co op are saying. Do you know why we feel the way we do about abortion? What does God say? Have you ever considered talking to your older kids about why people get abortions and helping them to understand more
Yeah.
about that topic? Because it is a nuanced topic. It's not just that abortion is murder. There's much more to it than that. And entering into hard conversations like that gets you in the practice of having hard conversations. And I guarantee you that, especially if your kids are little, that you're probably more uncomfortable than they are if you're that scared about it. And if you are that scared about it or afraid of it, you need to really press into why you're afraid of having those conversations and maybe think about your own upbringing or have that time in prayer with the Lord. Forgive your parents, maybe spend time
Mm-hmm.
in fellowship with your spouse and really discuss, hey, we need to start talking about this with our kids. Like, how are we going to do this? What was your sex ed experience like? You probably already know that about your spouse, but really getting into that with them so that you can present and be a team as you
Mm-hmm.
provide that safe space continually for all of your kids to talk to about the really hard issues in life and the kind of easier, simpler ones, maybe just around choosing a healthy dating relationship or something that might be easier to discuss. That really gets parents prepared.
I love that you bring that in for teens because I think that's really key. And it's hard to find, again, good resources talking about healthy relationships and consent and all this stuff that we never were taught. And I'm grateful that you bring that in for teens because I think that that is really important. And so do you envision your resources being something that the parents and the kids watch together? The kids watch some, the parents watch some. Like, how do you want them to navigate that or recommend that they navigate it?
Yeah. I let parents decide. The great thing about my curriculum is that you know exactly what's being taught and what's being said, and it's for your children, and you know them way better than I do, or than I ever will. I'll never even meet them. So it's really comes back to you. All the questions go back to you from your kids, but again, you're showing them that you're a safe space because you're the one playing this content for them. So some people do watch with their kids, particularly if they're little. If they're little,
Right, right,
you're the one that
right.
has to press play, right? But a lot of parents don't. They might watch it before or
Mm,
after, depending on time allowances, and make sure they're discussing from there. I do have a lot of journal prompts for kids to do and a workbook. And so
cool.
parents can also be grading that workbook using the grading rubrics for it as they go and having conversations there. But we all have our own experiences. Even I'm sure when I mentioned abortion earlier, that brings up a lot for people. That's a
Hmm.
very intense topic. And people have their own experiences and thoughts and yeah, like leanings about that. And it's okay to share some of that with your kids, right? It's okay to share a little bit even of your own backgrounds. Like I mentioned, when I was growing up, I didn't have talks about puberty, but I
Yeah,
really want to
right.
be that space for you. It is okay to say that, but there are age appropriate ways to handle various topics. And that's why I have different curriculum for different ages.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the age of the kid and your comfort level with watching with them, your time. etc. But I leave it up to the parents to figure it out. And some people have kids with special needs, right? And so they still
Hmm.
want them exposed to good content and healthy stuff, but they're going to have to pause a lot more or discuss it
Hmm.
with them more
Hmm.
thoroughly than they would maybe a different child.
But I love that it's not like we have to, it just makes me laugh when you say this because it's so ingrained. We're going away for the weekend to have the talk. And so it's not like you're buying this, you're going to use it one time. It's really these kind of lifelong conversations when you have different things for different ages. But if like me, you have kids that are teenagers, you could just jump in at the teenager spot. You don't have to start back at the beginning or anything. But I love that it's not like this pressure of we're gonna sit and watch 6 hours of content together. Because
Yeah.
oh, been there, done that. That was yeah, that was terrifying. It's funny. One of my kids, she was 11 and she was crying over milk that she spilt in the kitchen. And this was totally a God thing. I don't, but I was like, oh my gosh, she's about to start her period. And like my other kids, they were much, much later. And so it wasn't even on my radar. And I was like, oh my gosh, we got to talk about this. And so I was like, let's go to Moe's. And she's, I'm still traumatized every time I go to Moe's. We had the
Oh,
talk there.
oh yeah. Oh,
So prepared. And then a week later, I was like, wow, I'm so glad because yeah, I was one of those people that was like, what's happening to me one day and no one had ever explained anything. And you're like, and I was able to
exactly.
share
Like,
that too of like, I didn't want that to happen to
great.
you.
That's great because so many women do. They think they're dying or something's wrong with them, or they have no idea how to use a pad or a tampon, and nobody's talking to them about it. And so they're just terrified. And so it's good that you shared, hey, this is what I want for you. This is why we're talking about this.
Yeah. So, and I love too that you include resources to start younger. So it's not like we got to wait for the perfect moment to have the talk. This is a part of our conversation, a part of things that we're talking about all the time. And there are some, like you're saying, there are some very heavy topics and we all have our own kind of exposed to things, had different experiences, but there's also a beautiful part. So how do you bring that into what you're teaching the kids? Is it like, oh, I don't want to talk to them about that because then they might want to be tempted to go do something or whatever?
Mhm. That is a pretty classic mindset a lot of folks have is if I talk about it, they'll go do it. But it's actually not true. It's not based in too much. Like when they, for example, when groups teach sex ed or they teach about drugs or they
Right.
teach about, I don't know, drinking and driving, that it's not something that then they've learned and so now they're going to go try it, but it does actually depend on the how it was taught
Mm,
as well. And the way that I teach is very focused on open-ended questions and conversation and engagement. I want to explore your child's worldview. I want to see what worldview they're forming and why they're forming that, and then have like you as that response for them. And so
yeah.
the way that my curriculum is built is that, hey, this is a great topic. This is wonderful. We're reclaiming the education of it, but sex is a really good thing. And I communicate that frequently so that kids can hear that. And just the fact alone that I am talking about it, I think says that it's a good thing for them and that I start at a young age. But I'm not afraid to talk about the effects of sin either. And that's the balance, right? Because
Yep.
purity culture and legalism, and hey, I hope that you're wearing sweatpants because you don't want those boys to think of you naked. There's a balance between is there any truth to any of that? And where does
Hmm.
that come from if there is truth to it? Or is a lot of that myth and lie? And where does that come from? And so I'm all
Hmm.
about exploring what teaching works. And purity culture and legalism largely didn't work. It didn't work in outcomes. It didn't help kids to understand how to have healthy sex lives. It didn't help them to people who got the little ring or signed a
Yep.
pledge. That didn't actually work
Yep.
because it's not rooted in any sort of heart issues. It's rooted in body behavior, legalistic issue, rules.
Yeah.
And rules are things that we break. They really are. We're human. We tend to break rules, and many of us seek to even break them
Yeah.
or wonder
Right.
what's on the other side of breaking them. It's a little bit of our human nature post the fall, right?
Mm.
But if we understand why the rule is there and what it does for us and what the beauty of the rule is and why, if you're not just disciplining your kids, but you're explaining to your kids why the discipline is important, that's so much more full and healthy, holistic for that child to then move forward, even if they still mess up. Right. And so I'm not guaranteeing with my sex ed curriculum that no kid will ever mess up sexually and they'll be sexually whole, right?
Right.
No, I wish, but that's not reality. What I am guaranteeing is that you will have conversations in your home that will be fruitful, that will be encouraging, that will be healthy, that will spur on good discussion, and that will help them to understand more about God. And if we can use sex talks to understand more about God, then fantastic. That
Hmm.
is a huge gap that we had for years, way too long in the church. This is God's gift. So why did we stop talking about it? It
Hmm.
was his conversation. Why did we end the conversation? And I think it's partially because of shame and lies that
Right.
we wheedled, that's not a word, that wiggled their way in
Yeah.
to our psyche and to our attitude towards this. And so if I can help parents to understand that, hey, this isn't just like this uncomfortable hurdle you have to jump over one day. This is actually a lifelong opportunity, which is a joy and will increase your fellowship and discipleship of your children, then great. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's why I really appreciate what you have because it does show both that there is sin, there is rules, there is things that happen, there's consequences, but then there's also this beautiful gift as well. And so it's not one or the other. And almost on a regular basis, I see a parent in one of our groups going, "Oh my goodness, I just found out my son was exposed to blah blah blah," or my daughter
Uh-huh.
saw da da da, or they were doing their schoolwork on device and they got, and it's interesting to see people's advice in the comments of, and those kind of things. How do you talk about pornography in your program? And then in that situation, which again, sadly is occurring almost daily, what do you recommend for the parents to do?
So porn is the biggest sex educator there is, period. And it's not going away. I've seen things recently on age verification or this leader is doing this leader's doing that. That's all great, but it ain't going away. So I did briefly mention this earlier, but I do recommend starting to talk about it when they're
Yes.
little, like 3, 4 years of age. Because, and I don't call it porn then, I call it bad pictures,
Yes.
but them understanding that these are not kind. I used the word respectful earlier when we were talking. So
Yeah.
that it's not respectful, it's not loving. This is never, you should never have somebody take a picture of you. Nobody should be taking pictures of you ever. Nobody should be touching that part of your body. So it is really focused on safety when they're little. And that's something you
Mm-hmm.
can do as a parent as well with littles and older kids, but particularly with littles.
Mm-hmm.
Not really getting into the weeds about porn, but rather
Yeah.
focusing on the safety aspect.
100%.
My daughter even had a play date one time, I'll be honest, with this kid who we know the family, they're Christian, we trusted them, etc. And he was exposing himself.
Oh,
Granted, this started about 3 or 4, but he kept doing that for years. And
wow.
finally, I'm a sex educator and I do this all the time. And the first time I really did write it off is they're just really little and he didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
But by the second and lastly, the third time, even, I was like, okay, this is intentional. Like he's taking her away in a secret
Mm-hmm.
space.
Wow.
She's coming home and telling me he is flagrantly disobeying when he knows it's wrong to show her that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard to tell the parents that and to tell the parents we really can't even do play dates because we don't know what's going on with him right now, but there's an extra needed thing there
Mm-hmm.
of help or something's happening. And so that was a difficult thing, but because my daughter and I have regular conversations, she knew to really
Yeah, that's
quickly tell me.
amazing that she was, yeah, able to talk to you. Yeah.
Yeah. And she still can remember it. She still will mention him maybe like once a year and say, but nobody should show me their penis. She knows. And so, anyway, so it's really helpful and good and right to be talking about that. As
Yeah.
kids get older, I get much more overt in my language about how destructive porn is. So I really, without shaming kids who have seen it, because I just assume most kids
Yes.
have,
Right.
I do talk about what it does to the brain and its effects and how it's very addictive, how it's natural to be curious and to desire almost to watch more of it.
Yeah.
But what that leads to is a lot of harm in your relationships, in your future marriages, in your current connections to the opposite sex. I talk about how it changes the way you view people
Mm-hmm.
and how it creates more violence in your attitude and how ultimately it's just really disrespectful to the people in it. You think they're doing it because maybe they're having a good time or they want to do it, but in
Mm-hmm.
reality, there's a lot of abuse, there's trafficking,
100%.
there's the men are using drugs to help them get erections because they're so desensitized to the sex
Mm-hmm.
itself. They don't have relationships, you don't see marriages or you don't see
Yeah.
children, right? You don't see like healthy connection at all. So it's really the antithesis of what we want. Um, for our life. We want intimacy. We want to be seen. We want to be known. And
Mm,
that is not happening in porn at all. Porn is offering you a counterfeit to that. And it's absolutely destroying your image of sex. And
mm.
so I really talk quite honestly with teens about that.
I love
And I
that.
introduce that concept from the 11 to 13-year-old range,
Hmm.
but I talk about bad pictures from the time they're 3 till they're 10 in my
Yeah.
curriculum.
Yeah. That's so great because like you said, like it's it's not if, it's when. And so do they have the tools to go, no, I'm not supposed to look at that kind of picture and then to come and talk to you and know that's okay. But then also I do agree, like for these older kids, there is that shame of, oh, I saw that at that one like sleepover you're saying, or that one friend's house or whatever. And or I was even just doing school and something came on my computer and then how do I continue to learn about it without feeling shame for what happened? And so I love that you're just very honest about everything. And people my age, we've seen marriages destroyed because of this. We've seen the effects of people who this is destroying their lives now in their 30s and 40s. Is I don't We don't want you to get there, but we want you to be able to have talks with us and know that we're here to help you with that. Do you also teach or help kids with like our parents, I should say, with some of the digital safety kind of things or as well, or how to not be constantly exposed all the time?
Absolutely. So, digital safety is not my realm of expertise. Of course, it overlaps with my work. And even on my website, I have some recommendations. Like I have coupons, 30-day trials you can get with Covenant Eyes, or
Mhm.
filters you can get, Gab phones, Spark
Yeah, I
technology.
feel like I
You
need an IT degree sometimes with all this stuff, and then you figure one thing
right,
out, and
and
there's another. I was like,
I almost feel bad for the digital because it's so hard to keep up with what kids
right,
are doing. I just was reading recently that kids use Google Docs, like Word Doc, Google Doc, to chat with each other because you can share that document, right? And
and
so then you can have a
comment.
chat.
Yeah, I
Yes.
never even
And
thought
and
about that.
so
Yeah.
oh yeah, so it's just like a constant. There's so many apps and there's so many ways to get around filters and there's so like if
Mm-hmm.
there's a will, there's a way kind of
Yeah, right,
situation. And
right.
so
That's what the bigger
it's
issue
hard to
is,
keep up
right?
with. Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
yes, it's a good thing to protect your kids and use barriers. And especially if you're preventing, or even if a child has seen something and you know that's a problem, then of course you're going to get some things to put
Right.
barriers on the phone. I would suggest in that situation to explain to kids why you're doing that, right? Like it is
Hmm.
for their good. It is not
Yeah.
as a punishment. It is because you don't want their mind warped by this stuff. And you mentioned marriages falling apart. Absolutely true. And not just men watch porn, right? A ton of women
Hmm.
watch porn and read erotica novels and think it's
Yes.
like helpful for their marriage when it's not. It just has you fantasizing about somebody who's not your husband, which is not helpful long term. And actually sharing that with your older teens. Hey, you remember Joe and Susan, like a few blocks down or in that co-op? Like I've never
Hmm.
told you this before, and this isn't something you need to tell their kids. But the reason they're divorced now is because one of them had a really strong problem with porn and it was so rough for them that they ended up getting divorced or whatever the story
Yeah.
is, right? As you're able to share that and maybe you don't even share names because
Right.
your kid is friends with that kid, like it doesn't matter, how you do it in the details, but what matters is that you're showing kids this has real implications for your future. It's real disastrous, but it's a natural thing to be curious about.
Hmm.
However, it starts maybe innocently in
Hmm.
curiosity and it gets to a point where it's here. And so there's this balance of sharing real life stories and issues and also affirming that it does happen a lot and it's natural, but I don't want you to head to that place.
Yes. No, I think that's really important to acknowledge that curiosity is natural and you're going to want to know about these things. And so I'm here to help you, kind of give you some answers and tools now that are healthy and appropriate and those kind of things. As we wrap up here, what are some final words that you would like to encourage parents who maybe feel like this is so scary and so daunting, but they know they want to provide their kids with these opportunities and with these tools and they want to help, but when this is so foreign to me, I don't even know where to start.
First of all, I would say thank you for just wanting to do that with your kids and wanting to go there with your kids. And honestly, like I said, for many parents, reverse the cycle, change the way that it's being done for the next generation
Mm,
than it was for you. And so I'd applaud you and say that's great. I would encourage parents to pray and really be in fellowship with the
mm,
Lord about it. And then with their spouse too, if that's applicable, to really have these discussions about what are our plans? What do we want to communicate to them? Do we want to be together? Do we want to be
mm,
separate? Why? And if there's trauma, if there's secret addictions of your own to actually confess those
Mm,
first, which is a whole nother thing. But it is related to your probably ability to do this well with your kids. It doesn't mean
mm,
you shouldn't, but it just means that it will be somewhat of a hindrance if that's something you've never gotten out there, a past trauma or abuse or a porn addiction that you haven't talked about with your spouse. So I would encourage that first to
mm.
basically take steps to reclaim your own healthy
Yeah,
sexuality.
wow, that's great.
And then after that step, to start to consider that this is going to be a step-by-step process and not, as we've said, one big conversation where it all hinders on your ability to do well in that one time at Moe's or wherever you were, right? It is, you will mess up. We're parents, right?
Mhm.
So we mess up, we're human, but there will be more opportunities to do well. And it is okay to simply start with, hey, I've never done this before, but I want to do this with you. This is a really important topic. I care about your safety. I care about your health. I care about your future, whatever. And so I want to start talking about, and here's why. So I really think as if you take it step by step in that way, like very bite-sized, then you'll feel more comfortable going into it. And this is why I have this resource. If you're like, I want to have all these conversations, but I really don't know how and what's appropriate and at what time, that's exactly why I have my curriculum and
Yeah.
why I'm happy to offer it to parents. But I think as well, there are books out there if you want to start there. And those are all listed on my website, what books I
Okay,
found really helpful.
great. We
there
could link
there
to
are
that.
resources
Yeah.
for
Yeah, we'll link to your curriculum and then yeah, if you have a page of suggested books, that would be great too. We're big book people, my audience. And you have graciously given people a coupon code that we'll put in the show notes. They can check it out and get started. That was very kind of you. Thank you. I really appreciate it because I do feel like this is such a needed resource and so valuable, but most parents have no clue. And so you have provided such amazing tools and resources for parents to get started on this. And what a beautiful gift. Hopefully, we will be able to reclaim what God created here and that this next generation will have such a different experience. And it's not getting easier to battle what's going on. It's getting worse. And so you're not going to send your kid out to battle without a shield or a sword. We have to give them the equipping tools that they need. And so thank you for creating this and offering this discount code. So we'll put that in the resources as well.
Yeah, thank you for your time today and for the podcast that you're doing for your audience. I'm sure that I think this conversation is probably a little bit different than some of the stuff
Yeah.
maybe you're typically doing, right? But
And
like it's
I
good.
was
Like
telling my friend, I was like, oh, I'm having a very interesting podcast interview today.
sex. I say sex so much. I cannot even with you so much in my life. Oh my gosh. But I was gonna say I like that you mentioned the battle picture because it's so true. You wouldn't send your kid out to a battle without any armor or a sword. And this is such a battle. And Satan is
100%.
taking
Oh, yeah.
huge ground.
Yes.
And I've had enough of that. I'm so
Hmm.
sick of Satan.
Amen, girl.
Like,
Let's
step
preach it. Let's
back.
get up on the table.
Yes.
Woo! I'm
Yes,
taking it
like
back.
step back, sir. Oh, I'm not gonna call him sir. Step back, like you get out of here. This is mine. My God created it.
Mhm.
You don't know what you're talking about. Leave my children alone. And some of that leave your children alone is not just like an angry, pissed off. I'm gonna talk to my parent friends about how much this conversation
Mm.
is happening in the world and how much the world sucks. It's also about literally arming and equipping your kids and talking to your kids about it.
Yes.
And using that passion that you have, that pissed off anger that you have, which believe me, I have against Satan and
Mhm.
against the dark forces of this world and sin, to turn into, okay, how am I going to talk about this with my kids in a way that really does reclaim it? Because it's not just anger and fight
Right.
against Satan. There is a
Right.
lot of joy and a lot of beauty in it. So really reclaiming that full picture is such a great opportunity. And I'm excited for your parents who listen to this podcast after to hear about what happens and the
Yeah.
conversations they have with their kids.
Yeah. And also I'll link to your Instagram too, which is a great, you have great reels and resources on there. Just if parents want something free that they can even start with. Like I love the content that you're just giving out because it really does show you like, oh, you could have a conversation like this. You could use these words. You could, and just as a way to like simply get started and even just to start thinking about it in a different way, your free resources are fantastic as well. So thank you for offering that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Feast Life. I know that is a hard conversation to hear, but I hope it gave you some encouragement and some direction in order to have these conversations with your children. Let's recap today's key takeaways. Why reclaim sex education. Kristen emphasizes the need to reclaim this from the world by teaching it as a beautiful God-created gift. Ignoring the topic or relying solely on purity culture leaves children unprepared for the realities of life and relationships. Breaking the silence. Many parents avoid conversations about sex because of their own past traumas or upbringing. Kristen encouraged us to confront our fears and start small, ongoing conversations with our children rather than relying on the one-time talk, because we all know that creates way too much pressure, right? We also talked about addressing pornography and digital safety. Pornography is the leading educator on sex for many children. Kristen advises starting conversations about bad pictures as early as age 3 and gradually introducing more detailed discussions as kids grow older. She also highlights the importance of equipping children with tools to navigate an increasingly sexualized digital world. We talked about healthy relationships and consent. In Kristen's curriculum, she provides age-appropriate lessons on boundaries, healthy relationships, and consent, helping teens develop a balanced view of their bodies and relationships without shame or fear. This is such an important role for us as parents. Parents are encouraged to view these conversations as an essential part of discipling their children, equipping them not only with biblical values, but also with practical tools to face these cultural challenges that our kids are going to face. And last but not least, have joyful conversations over time. Kristen advocates for integrating discussions about this into daily life, making it a natural, ongoing dialogue that builds trust and openness between parents and children. Make sure to check out the show notes for the discount for her sex ed reclaimed curriculum. And remember, it's never too late to start. By taking small steps, praying, and leading into God's grace, parents can reclaim this topic for their families and equip their children to live confidently and joyfully in God's design. Thanks for listening. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please heart it down below and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and let me know what you learned in today's episode. I'd love to hear from you.